invite Professor Tamar Flash to introduce our next speaker, please.
Okay. Thank you, Tzvi. Thank you, Moshe. I want to introduce, it's an honor for me to introduce Professor Shimon Ullman from the Weizmann Institute. Shimon Ullman is a Sami and Ruth Cohen Professor in Computer Science at the Weizmann Institute. His areas of research are combined computer and human vision, human cognition, and brain modeling. He obtained his BSc in mathematics, physics, and biology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and his PhD in electrical engineering and computer science at the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT. He's a recipient of the 2008 David Rumelhart Prize in Human Cognition, the 2014 Emet Prize in Art Sciences and Culture, and the Israeli Prize in 2015. And he's a member of the Israeli Academy of Science and Humanities. He's also a member of the National Committee of Molmop. And Shimon is also a personal friend, and is the person who is responsible or in charge or whatever for me being at the Weizmann, and he's also a very nice and very special person. So Shimon.
Okay, thank you, Tamar, and thank you, everybody, the organizers and the audience. I will talk about some work in computer vision. The official title was, as seen here, Computer Vision Meets Machine Learning and Human Cognition. These are the general topics. I'm interested in sort of general topics in image understanding, in how vision works in both man and machine. But I will start, I will start the presentation, or the presentation will go, let me see, it's not the, okay. With a more specific, technical, scientific presentation of recent work, I'll describe it in some detail and then go back to the more general issues of understanding images, how it happens, or directions of doing it in machines, and how it might happen in the brain. So I will start with the more technical issue, the more specific issue, which I call atoms of recognition, sort of the smallest components of visual recognition and understanding, and you will see as we go along what I mean by that. So the topic, the general topic, is understanding what's happening in the world through vision, looking around and understanding what's happening. So when we look at an image like this, for example, just one image, we understand what's going on. We know why the woman is crying. We know what happened before. We know who she is trying to help and things like that. We are very far from understanding how this understanding comes about. We do not have systems, artificial systems, that can look at image like this and produce this kind of understanding that I just mentioned. The kind of work in automatic understanding of images focused on what's called object classification, basically looking at images and being able to name, recognize and name some of the objects that are present in the scene. So a system might look at an image like this and be able to sort of spit out objects that it managed to recognize and give you a list that there is a woman, there is a girl, maybe more, there is a satellite dish somewhere, more than one, I think, a tree, and so on. So this will be sort of the output, which is, of course, not the ultimate target that we would like to achieve, which is the full, meaningful understanding of the situation. And this is what our work is about, what I've been interested for many years, and then I said both understanding how the brain takes images, basically pixels from the retina, and produces this understanding, and how you can connect an electronic camera to a computer and take in the incoming image and produce this sort of understanding. We still have a way to go, and I would like to tell you about some recent work and I think promising direction that we have been following. So extracting meaning from images is very difficult. Part of the difficulty comes from the fact that the high variability, you look at something which is sort of meaning, in terms of the meaning, it's the same. We see here basically people drinking on the front, on the top row, there are different people drinking. But as you can see, the images are very diverse and each one looks different from the other. So this high variability makes recognition very difficult, or understanding what's going on very difficult. At the same time, getting the right meaning, understanding what the thing is, depends very often on some small details that you have to somehow pay attention to and take the meaning out. If you look at the next row, the things, the three images below, you can see these people are not drinking, but the difference between this and the actually drinking people is sometimes subtle, and it confuses current computer system. They would typically treat all of them as being basically the same. And we can see the differences and we can explain them, but it's very difficult to do automatically. Now, if we look at this issue of high variability and the details, let's look at these images. You can see that, again, there are all these 4 people drinking, even drinking from a bottle. And if you just train on these images, if you try to store these images and later on look for similar images in order to recognize them, it will become impractical and infeasible because of each one of them looks different. But if you focus, if you manage to find and automatically find the areas in the image which are the most significant or really carry the highest content of information in order to perform this task, sorry, let's see if it works. Yes, you can see these 4 sub-images here, which focus on this place which is telling us what is really happening in the image, namely a person drinking from a bottle. And now you can see that these 4 sub-images are, on the one hand, recognizable. We can see what's going on. On the other hand, they become virtual copies of one another. Once we focus on the right source of information, much of the unnecessary variability goes away, and we can derive the meaning from, in detail, from the rich, the informative and rich sub-images which tell us what's happening in the image. So we became interested in reaching these goals of minimizing variability and focusing on informative components by identifying eventually automatically places in the image that really tell us what's going on, and then analyze them in detail in a manner that I will show you as we go along. But we started with this question of what people can do. If you look at images, what are the minimal configuration that people can take out of the image and still tell reliably what is the meaning, what is the content of the image. So here are how we went about it. I will tell you a little bit about some human studies, how we did it with humans, and then some computational models that recapitulate or can capture what people can do, at least to some degree, and some general implications about what it means about how we can go about in the future in order to recognize complex images of the type that I showed at the beginning. Let me just mention there are a number of people involved in this. I will not go through the names, but the first group are students and a postdoc at the Weizmann Institute. The second 2 are a postdoc and a student at MIT. I spent some of my time working on these things at MIT. It's part of an ERC grant, and people who want to see the detail, it's pretty recent work. Much of what I described, but not all of it, is in a recent paper called Atoms of Recognition in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and it just appeared a couple of months ago. So here's the human study. We want to know the atoms of recognition. What is the minimal thing that can be recognized? And here's how it goes. We show a person an image, that's the image of the dog, for example, here, and ask them what's in the image, test if they recognize it. Suppose that the image is, say, just for concreteness, 50 by 50 pixels, and they recognize it. If they recognize it, we generate automatically 5 descendants to this original image, by either cropping it by one of the corners, and instead of say 50 by 50, we now have a 48 by 48 pixel image, or we keep the original image but just downsample it. We sample it more coarsely and produce an image that covers the original image but only by 48 by 48 sample point instead of the original 50. We rescale everything to the same original dimension in terms of size on the screen, but now we show people each one of these descendants. Can you recognize this one? If they do, we continue this tree search and generate the descendants of the recognizable image and repeat this over and over until we reach images that you will see are sort of minimal and recognizable. Now, this is tricky technically because you can use a person only once. If a person can recognize this image and you show them the next image, they will be able already to recognize it based on what they've seen just seconds ago. So we show the image once to a person and then we show the next images to different people, and this requires lots and lots of people. So in fact, about 15,000 people participated in this test, and the only way to do it is doing it online. And so this is done online using an existing platform which is run by Amazon. There is the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform, and those of you who never heard of it, I highly recommend that you look into and find what it is. It's a wonderful platform that one can use by designing tests, and you can upload it to the automatic Amazon platform, and you can conduct sort of surveys and tests using thousands and thousands of people very quickly and efficiently. It's an interesting, I think, it's a technical issue, but it allows you to do things that were simply impossible to do just because of the technical difficulties. There is no way you can bring 15,000 people to your laboratory and see what they can do. Now, we define as a minimal image that the atom of recognition is something that can be recognized, that the image here, with the green image, which is recognizable, but none of the descendants is recognizable. So it's on the edge of recognizability. You recognize it, and then you try to crop it or to reduce it a little bit more, and recognition goes away. And an interesting finding, which is the basis for some of the work that then follows, is that something strange happens. There is a very sharp transition always at the boundary between what is recognizable for us and what is not recognizable for us. And let me show you some examples, just for fun. We'll do the experiments here. So I will show you some examples of images from down here which are typically non-recognizable or recognized by only a small percentage of the population. And then I show you the direct father of this image, something which is before the final reduction, which is typically recognized by a large majority of the people. So the first one will be difficult to recognize. What I'll ask you to do to sort of participate quickly in this experiment, if you recognize what you see in the image, raise your hand. Don't say anything because this will influence other people. Just raise your hand and we can just see, hopefully in the experiment working here, few people will recognize the one down here. Many more people will recognize something which is very similar but just slightly more detailed. So here are the pairs. I'll show you a couple of examples. If you recognize this, raise your hand. Nobody. Okay, let's see. If you recognize this, okay, you can see that quite a few. Let me show them side by side. It's both a torso, it came from a horse image of the full-size image of the horse, the sort of the torso, the body of the horse and the neck. And you can see that here, I think nobody recognized it. Maybe somebody recognized it and I missed them. 3% of the population, basically nobody recognized this one. 93% of the population recognize this. Let me show you a couple of more examples. Anyone recognizes this? Okay, let's see. Anyone recognizes this? Okay, what is it? If you can just shout. Right, it's a sheep, a boat. Let me show you side by side. You can see that they're almost identical. Here you can actually sort of guess what is the critical feature that makes the entire thing recognizable. 80% of the population here, so basically everybody, almost everybody, 0% here. Nobody recognizes this, and you can see that, in fact, it's a couple of pixels which are missing on the left side of the image. The last one, recognize this. This is easier, but yeah, at least one person recognizes it. Can you recognize this? basically everybody, and you can see again that it's again a couple of pixels, which of course contain a meaningful contour that you need it, but the images are almost identical, almost 90% here, 15% here, so something dramatic happens, and it's always the case. In this minimal images, recognition sort of breaks down, it's sort of a phase transition. Once you reach the level of something which is still recognizable, a very small change and everything disappears. We collected in this way a very large data set. You can see parts of it. These are things that people can recognize and are atomic. Nobody can recognize them, roughly speaking. Nobody can recognize them. If you just touch them a little bit, they lose their recognizability. I find this interesting, by the way, in terms of our system, the brain, recognition, experience, learning, because think about it, this is numbers average about population. It's not that one person is sensitive to a particular thing, but you take people from the United States, India, Brazil, people who saw horses, people who saw less horses, and everybody, regardless of their individual experience, sort of everybody that we tested recognized this, 93%, and nobody recognized this. So we all walk in the world carrying in our head, basically, essentially, the same representation of a horse, because we all fail at exactly the right, at exactly the same, for exactly the same images. It's also interesting and very useful for computer vision that the fact that you can collect and identify these highly informative, rich, recognizable atomic features, there are lots of them. A typical image, a typical object will be covered by many, many of those. And if you can do the right job and recognize things from this limited atomistic thing, the recognition becomes highly robust and highly reliable because things can transform, can be occluded, can be corrupted, and you can still recognize things reliably from the minimal components. So it's an interesting, the sharp transition is a very interesting and useful research tool because now you can identify what are the crucial features of visual recognition. You compare two images, almost identical. One is recognizable, the other one, you left something out and it becomes unrecognizable. So something important is present in this small identifiable region that you can examine and conclude things about the recognition process. An interesting next observation is more computational. It turns out that if you take current high-performing recognition model, the best model that you have in computer vision, they cannot deal with this limited information that people can deal with. People are excellent in dealing with this reduced information. You try to train and test current leading computational schemes for object recognition, and they fail on this limited image. Let me just show you, this becomes an important topic to look at all the failures of all the models, why they fail, how they fail, what is missing. I will not go into detail, but just show you one particular, what I mean by this is that you let computers see, computer vision system look at airplanes, for example, and we know what are the minimal images that people can recognize in images. So after training, and they do a very good job at recognizing new airplanes, you present them with things that people can recognize, and they fail. Just to show you, this is from, there is a lot of information here, but let's just focus here. The blue bar is the performance, the accuracy of the computational, the computer vision system after training. When you test it on new images of airplanes, and it reaches about 80% correct recognition of new images, complicated images in which there is an airplane somewhere, they still reach 80% recognition. It's very impressive. It's something that was impossible to do a couple of years ago, but the recognition in terms of being able to recognize minimal images that people can recognize was here about 7% or something like this. A huge drop, so they cannot deal with these images. They also, and I will not go into details here, they do not show, even when they recognize, or they do not show the difference between the minimal images and the sub-minimal images, which people are critical, telling us they do not use the same kind of feature that people can use and recognize. They do not get it in the minimal images. They do not get it in sub-minimal images. They just do not do it well enough. And one question is why humans were better than the models in being able to recognize some images, and how can we do it better, and how we can start to analyze and deal with images in a better way. Let me just mention, I think some of you probably know it, some of you may not, and just that what worked best for us and what works best in computer vision now, in computer-based recognition in general. The best performing models we find too, agreeing with what other people find, is models based on so-called deep networks, and it really works relatively well and very easy to train. I assume that many of you heard about the term deep networks for vision, and not only for vision. In vision, it made a revolution in 2012. Suddenly, a particular algorithm achieved performance in sort of international computer, sort of Olympic games or competition that we run every year. I mean the community. There was suddenly an algorithm that performed significantly better than others. It was an algorithm which was called DeepNet, which in fact was not very new. It's sort of a small development of things that people did already in the late 80s and then put them aside. And then they had a resurgence and suddenly became much, much better than they were before. In recognition, in vision, it became very successful in other problems, things called segmentation, face recognition. Face recognition by computers now is better than face recognition by humans, and it's done using the best system at the moment is something trained by Google. They do very well, and the system is better than human recognition of faces based on deep networks. By the way, these deep networks require, unlike human, require tremendous amount of supervised training. For example, the Google system was trained on 240 million face images before it achieved good performance. And none of us saw 240 million face images in their lives. In fact, it's already, a significant proportion of how many people we have on the planet. It was also used, or it's being used now for more sophisticated systems, and in the autonomous cars, which are being developed now in a variety of places, including in Google, including here. In Israel, Mobileye is a leading leading research and modern research sort of implementation of autonomous cars. So here are cars driving on the road. This is the autonomous one. It drives very well, and I think people now really believe that automatic, robotic, autonomous cars are not a dream of the future. It's something that will actually happen. It's interesting to know that one of the difficulties is still related to what I started at the beginning, with more understanding of images rather than simpler image processing. So a big problem, for example, in these vehicles now, the autonomous one, is left turn at an intersection. When you turn left and there is incoming traffic, you have to sort of have a negotiation with the other drivers and see, do they see you, do they let you make the turn, and so on. And this is something that these systems still cannot do. They can stay in lane, they can estimate the velocity that they close on the vehicle in front, but this kind of more sophisticated understanding of social interaction is still lacking. There are interesting application to robotics, and this is for you to discuss. I'm not going to discuss robotics. I'm not an expert on the use of these networks in robotics, but they are coming along. This is from a recent paper, I think this year in 2016, on sort of grasping in robots. There are other things that I'm showing you some examples of pictures from papers in which people in robotics describe their use of training and using this kind of methodology for robotics. However, as I said, even these kind of more sophisticated kind of methodologies that work very well are still not sufficient for getting real understanding and meaning from images, and are not as good as humans in dealing with minimal images. And let me tell you what we think is the major thing that is still missing. when we look at and recognize an image which is part of these small meaningful images, although they're atomic in the sense that you cannot recognize something that is smaller than this image. You make it smaller and you lose recognition if you don't know what you're searching for. Once we recognize it, we also extract from this minimal image a very rich internal structure which helps us to understand what is happening in this image. For example, this is an image of a piece of a person with suit and tie. Once we know and we see that this is a person with a suit and tie, and as I said, 90% of the people do it immediately, rather than just giving it a label that's a person, we see the neck and the tie and even the knot in the tie and the shirt and the suit and so on. And we are not fooled by similar structures that deep networks thought that these are also belong to the same class of a person with suit and tie, because these images lack the kind of internal structure that we understand what this structure is, we extract it, we understand it, and this ability to go into the level of detail that we can do and machines cannot do is crucial for deriving meaning from images. We've developed a set of new algorithms, which I'm not going to describe, which are able to perform this internal, full, rich internal interpretation of small images. It's important that they be small because the algorithm for interpretation the complexity naturally increases with the number of internal elements you have to deal with. So we think that it's very important that you start the full understanding and interpretation process at the level of local recognizable images and build from them on, and you cannot do it directly for large images. So the kind of architecture of image understanding that we get is more complex and I think more interesting and probably more realistic than simple feed-forward flow, which is currently the sort of the backbone of all recognition system. We think in terms, and I will not go in detail, that you have a first pass of understanding, which is sort of more what we do now in computer vision. It gives you some initial label that this may be a person, there may be a horse there. Sometimes they are wrong, they are still not good enough, and they will never be sufficiently accurate. But then you start to apply to the image following this initial suggestion or candidates, you apply in a more top-down manner, in a manner that depends on a lot of information you stored in memory about checking specific things in specific locations, and you continue to evolve the understanding of the image, either inside what you already recognized, or you start to spread over to the entire image. For example, if you look at this image here, most of you would be able to recognize that that's a woman, a person, or even a woman, probably drinking from a glass. You can recognize in our modeling, and I think that this is what's happening, that you start with the more minimal image of the face. Once you see the face, you can spread the sort of the understanding. You see the next object docked directly into this woman's mouth between the lips, and this can, in our modeling, and I think in the human brain too, allows you to extend the understanding of the image to surrounding items which are ambiguous on their own, but become disambiguated once you start with the small images and you spread around. So what we try to do next, and I will not describe anything in detail, we want to really be able, and we start to do this, deal with complicated images and be able to do this apply this two-stage type of analysis, the initial recognition and then inspecting the crucial informative details that allow you to extract more fuller understanding. Just as illustration, on the top, this is for action recognition that we are dealing with. If you look at the top row, one of the person is smoking, the other one is not. You can probably tell which one is smoking and which one is not, and also be convinced that it really depends on inspecting some informative things at the right location. Current computer algorithm treat both of them as smoking, and it's wrong. The other one, current computer system, treat both of them as two people hugging. When you look at it, you can probably tell that one pair of people is hugging, the other one is not. These are difficult things that now we do. We get sort of the two people in close proximity using the first flow of analysis and continuing close inspection of the informative details in the image tell us that one is really hugging, the other one is not. We're also interested, this is part of my own interest, trying to follow how all of this is happening in the brain, and we think that we start to have the signature of this second stage of processing that goes beyond the initial object classification and dives in and gives us the richer meaning of images. We think that we start to have the signature in the brain for when it's happening. This is using something called MEG, which we are doing, and some other laboratories in the world are now doing it, similar experiments as well. So let me sum up. I described sort of more technically the ability to extract and deal with, not with the big image, but focus on minimal recognizable images that are very helpful in studying the way in which we get rich information from images, both for computer vision and in human vision. I mentioned the deep nets and current methodology, which works pretty well in various domains, in vision and otherwise, but they have sort of this fixed pipeline of bottom-up, and they fail in trying to get detailed meaning out of images, out of the full understanding of what's happening in the image. We believe that full image understanding really depends on the effective integration of this initial flow and then guided application, sort of guided based on your long-term memory and expertise that you acquired, that allow you to go from the initial stage to a fully detailed understanding of the image. We think that this is the beginning. This will become an important direction, both in understanding our brain, how things are happening up and down, going in the brain. It really depends on flow of information from low-level areas to areas in the brain which are known to be so-called higher areas, which deal with more semantic meaning and information, but then flow of information from these areas which are more abstract and dealing with meaning, going back to the image and saying, now I want to inspect this, now I want to inspect some other detail in the image. It happens in the brain, and it should happen in computer vision too, in order to achieve the full understanding, deriving full understanding of automatic understanding of images in the way that people do. So let me stop here, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Is there any questions? Go ahead.
Okay.
Do you think a random forest approach might be better than the deep nets for some of the problems you talked about, or something the same application?
I think they do it, it's included in these networks as well, and yeah, and it's still insufficient. They do actually, they do include things like coarse to fine within the flow of the network as well. Yeah. It's not. It's just a technical. You know, even with this, we needed 15,000 people in order to go in a reasonable way over subsets, sub-images. The sub-image does not need to be exactly square or things like that. It's typically without holes, I think. It's for a variety of reasons. It's also in the brain. If you look at the neuron in the brain and you ask what is the area of the image that this neuron is responsible for, looking in the image, it's always sort of a compact region. It's usually more roundish than a square, and they become bigger as you go up the system. So I would say it's a contiguous region, limited, quite small. Many of these images are about 10 sample points, 10 pixels of 10 to 15 pixels on the side. You need relatively small images in order to already know what's going on, and I think they're typically contiguous, but not necessarily square in shape.
Okay, I apologize, but we have to stop here. First of all, let's thank this distinguished speaker and the previous one, and we're very glad actually to have them both at this conference, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And so besides my thanks, I really hope that what we heard about here will actually become part of the robotics community and the robotics research, and as I said before, will actually propel Israeli robotics to new heights. So thank you very much.